And we will move on now to our next presenter, Dr. Priscila Scoville. Priscila Scoville is an historian that studies the ancient Near East. She teaches middle and high school kids across the world and in Brazil, where she's engaged in a project to bring education to teenagers from poor families, encouraging them to pursue a university-level course. The title of her talk today is How Connected Was the Ancient Near East During the Amarna Age? Priscila, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you you all for creating this conference, this virtual conference. This is a very interesting and important ideal. It's important especially for people like me that are in Brazil or other peripheral countries. So it's a very important and interesting initiative. I first want to start apologizing. I normally don't like reading when I'm presenting something, but I'm mentally tired as I was teaching all day. Today I was with 6th and 7th graders and they are very loud, so I'm mentally tired. And to be sure that I will be on time and that I will be able to talk about everything that I planned, I will be reading. Okay, so I'm sorry for that. I hope this is okay for you. I will try not to make it so massive and tiring for everyone. Just give me a second. I will share my screen here. So studying the ancient Near East is something relatively new in Brazil. The first generation of Brazilian scholars dedicated to the subject carry out their academic training in Europe or in the United States in the early 1960s or 70s. There is not many bibliographic or archaeological collections in Brazil about any kind of any group and people of the ancient Near East, and not just here in Brazil, but other Latin America countries. So it's a little bit difficult for us here, and this is why I want to first appreciate this initiative. Still, the number of researchers dedicated to the history of ancient Near East has grown in recent years, much because of policies like open access and initiatives that are virtual. This idea of non-profit has made the field more accessible for peripheral countries, even though they often end up being excluded from large congresses and conferences, to the high prices to travel abroad, the fees, and the cost of maintenance in these places. And then what I mean to say with this is thank you for this. The Save Ancient Studies Alliance has made it possible to engage a greater public over the world, and especially here in Brazil. So I appreciate the initiative, not just for me, but on behalf of all these Latin American and Brazilian scholars. So to start, my presentation is how connected was the ancient Near East during Amarna Age. It is my thesis that I just defended in last May. So I just a new doctor here in the area. We just finished it. And I like to give a summary of what I was doing, like some of the main ideas. Oh, sorry. So just like today, ancient people didn't want to be isolated. Connecting with other cultures was an important part of their life. From this realization, official relations between courts began to emerge in the 3rd century BC. The oldest evidence of diplomatic correspondence ever found is a letter exchanged between the kings Irkabdamu of Ebla and Zizi of Hamazi. And this is the one that is on the slides. I will not read everything. It's just there for you. But the content that is written in this document shows us that this is not the first correspondence ever written, but it's just the first evidence that we have. Over time, more rules were structurized and they were structurizing these diplomatic relations. The beginning of the Near Eastern diplomacy can be separated into 3 main moments based on the documentation of Ebla, Mari, and Amarna. Briefly, we can understand that during the Ebla era, contacts with foreign kingdoms were guaranteeing security in case of attacks and economic benefits, facilitating trade. The world was dynamic, and the boundaries of each Mesopotamian city-state were changing rapidly, as were the power relations. Then came Sargon of Akkad, who transformed how kings interact with the world, creating an empire. Although his empire did not survive for long, one of the greatest legacies left by him was the centralization of power in a capital, replacing the disposal of city-states. Because of this, connections with organs had to be reshaped. During the new phase of diplomatic relations, the Mary era, the focus became to build and to maintain the power of some kingdoms. That is, the correspondence exchanged between kings did not seek only the security and defense of the territory, but served as a tool for territorial expansion. At the time, the contract established had a lifetime charter or a fixed term. It does not guarantee stability. Thus, the Syro-Mesopotamian region faced an aggressive environment that triggered a dark age. With that, the suspension of diplomatic activities, migrations of new groups, and destruction or abandonment of several cities happened. Once again, the world was remodeled and the centrality of relationships changed, shifting from south-central Mesopotamia to the east. Such a change was not random, but coincided with the expansion of Egypt through the Levant and the rise of Mitanni in northern Syria. I said Islam because I was talking about Islam in class, and this is still on my mind, so sorry. The expansion of Egypt through the Levant and the rise of Mitanni in northern Syria. Egypt and Mitanni are crucial kingdoms for this new phase of diplomacy, which is the Amarna Age, as their rulers were responsible for stimulating the exchange of letters once again. This resumption of diplomacy followed written patterns that had already been established in the previous moments, but for the first time, it included an idea of a common objective: peace through the maintenance of the status quo. With that, the exchange of messages became more than a diplomatic contact, but a system that changed the structure of thought from individual to collective. It also implies that the agreement were inherited by their successors. In other words, the treaties were eternal and no longer for life. And the royal actions towards the others had to respect the traditions of the previous agreements. This change guaranteed more stability to the diplomatic system and to the Near Eastern world. With this diplomatic systematization, wars no longer happened with the same frequency. The great hegemonic powers, Egypt, Mitanni, Babylon, Hatti, and Assyria, did not engage in major conflicts, except in the vassal territories. Another key point is the cultural exchange, which included external elements into the Mesopotamian tradition, once Hatti, Egypt, and Mitanni became part of these connections. At the time of Amarna diplomacy, peace was relatively respected, and the system acted as an autonomous interstate institution. However, these kings did not understand each other in the same way as they tried to demonstrate in the letters. Much has already been discussed about Amarna diplomacy. I propose to look at these letters through the eyes of digital humanities. Digital humanities do not have a single definition, but generally they are researchers equipped with digital instruments to a greater or a lesser extent. I use social network analysis approach based on a software named Gepi and another one named NoodleXL, allowing a mathematical and a visual mapping of this context in the ancient Near East. I focus on the diplomatic relations between equals. I restrict myself to the documents referring to the independent or hegemonic kingdoms, which are Alashia, Aswa, Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, Hatti, and Mitanni. It comprises the letters E, A, 1 to 44, with the exception of EA 30 and 40. Before moving on to a more pragmatic data, we need to consider the basic concepts of the Amarna diplomacy: reciprocity and brotherhood. The hegemonic rulers had called each other brothers and established family ties. That means that they should be equals in all matters. However, they did not miss any opportunity to promote themselves and to criticize their neighbors. But how did they balance the difference between what they say and what they believe? When we reach the Amarna era and see that the diplomatic organization worked on a common objective, this did not happen out of idealism, but because peace suited them. Through peacekeeping, more economic goods could be exchanged, but fewer burdens would fall on them, and the status of the great kingdoms would be kept. The choice to systematize diplomacy meant changes, and more than ever, the idea of equality needed to be reinforced. They called each other brothers, but that does not mean that they understood each other as equals. So to answer the question proposed above, first, we need to focus on the diplomatic institution rather than the realms involved. A total of 26 royal individuals are mentioned in the selected letters, corresponding to 147 relationships, and 109 of which happens more than once. This shows us that the relationships tend to be maintained over time. By considering this context and with the help of the softwares, it is possible to measure the degree of each king and kingdom. And by degree, I mean how many relations they established and how central they were in this world. So here we have this chart with the numbers of their centrality, their degree of centrality as it follows. It should be explained that it is natural to find Egypt and its rulers highlighted, since all of the documentation refers to this place, which is the Amarna letters found in Egypt. What is interesting to note is that there is a pattern in the centrality of agents in this diplomatic system. Mitanni and Babylon, who have most tablets, 13 and 14 respectively, have the same degree as Hatti, who has only 4 letters. These kingdoms are still very close to Assyria, which has only 2 letters. These 5 states are the so-called Great Kings. So Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, Hatti, and Mitanni. According to the rules of Amarna system, they should be equal. Alahia and Aswa, which have a lower centrality, were independent, but they were not a hegemonic space. In addition, Assyria still has another particularity that explains the difference between its centrality and that of the other hegemonic powers. It was the last one to be included in this system. Here we have a network graph that shows us the size of the circles representing the degree of centrality of each of these kingdoms, a little bit more visually. That is, the larger the circle, the greater the number of the relations were established. The lines that connect each circle are called edges and show us who was connected with whom. It is clear then that the 5 hegemonic powers, Assyria, Babylonia, Egypt, Hatti, and Mitanni, are relatively even, and they stand out in contrast of the 2 independent kingdoms, which are Aswa and Alahia. For centuries, diplomacy was a tool for wars, strength, defense, or territorial expansion. A kingdom's prestige was measured by its size and influence. In the Amarna era, the need to demonstrate power still existed. but how it was understood changed. Prestige was not only directly related to the hegemonic area, but to the recognition of the others. To be a great kingdom and a brother, to be a great kingdom and a brother, the other kings needed to understand him as such. To this end, the systematization of diplomacy created a brotherhood between kings and aimed to bring balance to an unequal world. This goal was achieved as it was noticeable by the degrees of centrality that I showed you before. Even so, the disparity of interpretations in these personal and state spheres occurred. This is because having balance did not mean the existence of equality. Therefore, the Amarna system could remain stable with relative peace, even in face of people who believed to be superior than others. The rules of diplomacy were respected, but allowed for many interpretations. There was no specific or unique definition for some of the fundamental concepts of this system, such as reciprocity, which could be interpreted as equality, equity, compensation, or justice. The ambiguous way of dealing with these ideas allowed the kings to test their limits and to test the limits of the others, adjusting and adapting through rhetorical resources with the subtle, persuasive arguments and strategies. In addition, the system itself stimulated conflicts. Of course, if the goal was to keep peace, such conflicts could not escalate into war, but they should be recurrent enough to encourage communication. Because of this, despite of referring to each other as brothers, the kings showed their displeasure with certain situations. And as in every family, brothers could have disagreements. When trying to find solutions, more messages were exchanged, and along with them, more gifts were traveling. The practice was beneficial for the economy, favoring the interdependence of the kings, and consequently contributing to the peace. And thank you. This is all from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. Sorry, I had to wait for my camera to finish loading. That was wonderful. And I have to say, on a personal note, the Amarna period is one of my favorite historical periods. So I greatly enjoyed hearing about that. While we wait and see if there are any audience questions, can you maybe talk a little about the network theory analysis that I believe you were using to express the relationships between those different kingdoms?
Yeah, sure. So this network analysis is basically collecting all data, all information from the source, in this case, the letters. I had to do it manually, like reading the letters, collecting the names of everyone that is seated or someone that is related to the letter, collecting the name of the person, the kingdom, if they are talking about something else or someone else, what is being the main idea of this letter, collecting all this information and then placing it in the softwares. First, I used the Noodle Excel, which is a plugin for Excel. And in this software, I just put there the names and in each letter they are, and this automatically calculates how they are connected. It creates a graph. I collect this information. It is full of information. I just showed you this degree of centrality, but we have degrees of density, how connected they were, if they were saying good things of each other or bad things about each other. So everything is there. And I get this information and then use it on Gephi, which is this other software that I think creates a better graph. It's just to create this visual map, because I can change the colors, I can change the lines. I think it's looking better than the one that I have in Noodle Excel. And with all this information, we can understand many different things. because just by reading the letters, by reading the text, sometimes we miss some things. And here we have like a mathematical calculation of these things that helps us to see from different angles.
Thank you. And if people want to read these letters for themselves, where can they find them?
We have some translations, like in Portuguese, that is the case of Brazil. My thesis is the first one that translated it, not all of them, but these first 44. In English, we have two good translations from Rainley and William Moran. They are good translations. They have different views on how to translate. William Moran is the oldest one and has a better a sense of reading it a little bit easier, and the Rainley one is a little bit more true to what is reading down, like exactly literal words there. Both of them are very good in telling us what is in the letters, but they have different approaches and translation.
Thank you. And someone else is also asking, is Mari a place or a person?
Mari is a place. It's a city in Syria. I have here on the map, if I can show again, let me just share here a screen. It will be a little bit easier. Where is my screen now? Here. Mari is a place that is in northern in Syria, here, right here, into Euphrates River. So the name of these documents are related to the place in which they are found. Like they were found in Ebla, they are found in Mari, they are found in Amarna. That's why I call it like this. Okay.
Thank you. And one more question before we head off to our final presenter of the day. You said that Assyria was one of the most mentioned in the letters, in spite of only having two. Do these mentions show some kind of concern about their rise to power and the relevant power balance in the era?
Yeah, so in terms of numbers, they are not mentioned a lot, but as they have less letters, as they appear in some others, they are very relevant. The main people talking about Assyria would be Babylon, as Assyria was once part of Mitanni and Babylonia, and once Assyria was trying to become this independent kingdom and create their hegemony in the area, Babylon would go to Egypt, send a message to Egypt saying, well, they are not independent, they are part of our kingdom, do not answer, do not engage with them. And then they continue to engage with Egypt. So it shows us how Assyria is ascending into power and in creating its own name at this point.
Thank you. We do not have any more questions for you, so I will let you go, but thank you again. This was a really interesting presentation.
Thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.